so we are here today to talk about how to calculate the right offer. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the two exit strategies that I'm going to be teaching about today. There's a lot of different exit strategies in real estate, and every different exit strategy is going to have a different set of pieces that you have to consider when figuring out your offer. So the two we're focusing on today are, first, the straight performing rental purchase. And that means it's, let's say it's a duplex or a fourplex and it's already got renters in there. It's already performing. It's a stabilized property. And you're basically coming in, you're putting your down payment, you're getting your loan, you're closing, and then you have instant cash flow. So that's one thing I'm going to teach you about. But there's still a lot of pieces to it and making sure that you're not overpaying. All right. And then the other exit strategy, which is infinitely more complex, but I really spent a lot of time to try different modes of explaining this to try to make it as methodical as possible so that everyone can really wrap their arms around this. But it's the BRRRR strategy. So the BRRRR strategy, it stands for buy, renovate, rent, and refinance. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the purchase part, the rehab part, and the refinance part, because those are all the ones that you have to be doing calculations on. All right. Okay, so let's first start off by talking about the straight purchase components. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each of these, but I do want to make sure you understand what they are so that when we get to the point where we're looking at the calculator, you can figure out like where it all fits in. Now, the calculator that I'm going to show you is part of what we have for our mastermind students. So this is not something that I'm giving out to everyone. It was thousands of dollars to create. So, but I do want to give you a visual representation of what it looks like to calculate these things. These are all things that you should be able to calculate by hand. All right, when I do it in Excel, it's because it's going to be the faster way to show you how making one change impacts other things. So in case the question comes up, oh, will we get access to this calculator? If you're in the mastermind, yes, or in the wholesale course, you have access to these calculators already. And if you're not in that, then you don't have access to these calculators, but the concepts are really what's more important for your really learning. The calculators that we have here are just a tool to make everything go faster. Okay, so I just want to preface that when you're seeing me use those tools, those are just tools that we have like internally. Okay, so components, straight purchase. So the straight purchase is we're buying the property, it's already performing, and we're going instant cash flow. So here are some of the different pieces that you have to consider when knowing like how much money is it going to take to get into it, and is that a good return on investment, etc. Your closing costs. So when you're buying the property and you're going to close, you have closing costs with the title company. So that's probably going to be title insurance, a lender policy for title insurance, recording fees, maybe mortgage stamps. Every market is a little bit different as far as what they have as far as closing costs. So when you're in your due diligence and you're finding out, what's wrong with the property and everything else, another thing that you can do to really serve yourself and have as much information as possible is call the title company and ask, what kind of closing costs should I expect? So like there's some areas, I want to say it was Kansas. Like in Kansas, there's something called mortgage stamp. So if you're going to be recording a mortgage on the property, there's more closing costs just from the title company standpoint because the county that the property is in requires that there be this extra fee. It's one of the ways that they raise funds, for their economy. So that's going to be a lot higher than somewhere else like Indianapolis that it doesn't have that. So you want to know going in because that might impact the offer that you make. If you realize, well, I'm going to have to come up with an extra, $800 or $1,500 at closing, well, you might want to offer a little bit less to try to make up for that. All right, so closing costs is one of the pieces. Funding costs. So with funding costs, if you're getting a loan, and I'm going to presume for the sake of this conversation that you are getting a loan, although you don't have to, you could buy it with cash, you could buy it with your self-directed IRA, your solo 401k. But if you are getting a loan, there are costs to getting a loan. So the funding costs are typically going to be potentially points. So lenders oftentimes have points. Another word for points is origination. And what a point is 1 point is equal to 1% of the loan amount. And it's basically it's a fee. It's a fee that the bank charges for compensation for them going through, I guess, the trouble of giving you the loan. So obviously on an ongoing basis, the money they're making is on interest, but they will most of the time have some kind of fee up front. When you start working with hard money lenders, those points tend to be higher than if you're working with a conventional bank. All right. So some of the other funding costs that you might run into is like, we just call them other fees. We call them junk fees. And, depending on the lender, sometimes the lenders call them junk fees too, but they're different lender by lender. But those could be like application fee, underwriting fee, legal fee, processing fee. Like they can call it any number of things. At the end of the day, for you, you just need to know how much is it, because that allows you to compare lender by lender and make sure that you're choosing the lender that makes the most sense for you. Okay, so funding costs are always going to be a part of it. Your down payment, how much of a down payment are you putting down? So right now it's probably most common to see putting down 25%, but we've seen anywhere from, 10 to 20% being norm. Right now, at the time that this is being recorded, 25% is probably the most realistic that you're going to find. Probably as more time goes on, it'll loosen back up and it'll be back to, 20% down or 15% down, maybe even 10. But whatever the down payment is going to play a part. And the reason is whatever the purchase price is, your down payment is going to directly offset the amount of the mortgage, and the amount of the mortgage is going to drive directly what the mortgage payments are. Okay, that's why it is part of the piece, and why you have to know, like, what is that going to look like. I mean, from the funding standpoint, you have to know, that you have the capital to do it, so it's important from that standpoint. But from running your numbers, excuse me, your mortgage balance is going to drive the mortgage payments. So down payment is going to be critical from that standpoint. All right, so your mortgage payments are going to depend on a couple of things. The amount of the mortgage, or the amount of the loan, your interest rate, so your annual interest rate, and also your amortization period. Okay, an amortization period is that period of time over which they spread the loan out. So, for example, if we're talking about a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, what it means is when they're figuring out how much your monthly payments are, they're basically going out an entire 30 years. And so that on the last payment, the 360th payment, that the balance is now zero. And it's always a blend of interest and principal. And in the very beginning, because your loan balance is the highest, your interest amount is the highest. And every month when you make your mortgage payment, it lowers your principal balance a little bit by the amount of principal. And so every month it starts flip-flopping. So in the beginning, the interest is up here, the principal is down here. And every month over the course of the loan, it gets to be, this, to the point where eventually your principal balance is zero. Okay, so those are some of the things that impact the mortgage payments. Some of the other components that you have to look at, so looking at, well, what is the property going to do as far as performance, is we're looking at what's the rental income, so how much money is coming in every month, and what are some of the expenses. Property taxes is a big one. Insurance is typically, it's a decent chunk. Property management, and because everything that we do and teach is going to be about you using a third-party property management company. We're not proponents or going to try to convince you that you should manage your own property. Not that you can't, but here's the thing that happens on a long enough timeline. When you're dealing with the tenants and you're dealing with the repairs and you're running all over town, you tend to get burned out. People do. And all the time you can pick up great deals from people who were landlords and they just got fried from doing it. And so this is a long-term play. You really want to be putting assets into play now that you can hold long-term if that's your plan. Well, if you burn yourself out, that's gonna, then why even bother to do it in the first place? So we build in the cost of property management so that we can keep our sanity and truly stay in the CEO position and run things and set things up, not be the one getting phone calls and dealing with the rent collections and dealing with maintenance and showing the property and marketing. Excuse me, all those things take a lot of time. And then you add on whatever you do for work. If you do something, in addition to your real estate, plus family, plus all those obligations, it's a lot. So putting property management in place gives you a much, much better chance of long-term success and you actually keeping those properties. All right, and then another component is maintenance. Now, one thing you might have, depends on the property, is you might have utilities. The way that Jennifer and I have set up our portfolio is we don't pay any utilities, or we pay the utilities, but the tenants pay us every month for their half of the projected utilities. So that's another thing that you might have as an expense. We don't, so I don't have it on here, but just be aware. All right, so see, these are some of the main expenses that you see. Now, in the third column, these three components, this is how you're evaluating whether the deal makes sense for you. So there's a couple things. One, cash flow, like how much money are you bringing in every month? Now, cash flow is a function of the net operating income minus the mortgage payment or the debt service. So backing up a little bit, net operating income is the rental income minus the expenses of the property taxes, insurance, property management, maintenance, utilities, any other expenses of the property, except the mortgage payment. That's not considered an expense of the property when calculating net operating income. And for those of you who are more interested in apartments, all of this applies there as well, like the same thing, net operating income. And then your cash flow is the net operating income, so rental income minus your expenses, minus the mortgage payment. So it's the net, what do you ended up with in your bank account at the end of the month after paying everything. That's your cash flow. So, is the cash flow sufficient? Does it meet your needs? Does it meet your goals? Is it worth doing at that price? Okay, and obviously if you think about it, the price you pay for the property is going to have a direct impact on the cash flow, because when you bought the property, after you put your down payment, you have a mortgage that's left. So the higher the purchase price, the higher the mortgage, and the lower the cash flow. Okay, that's where it comes in. Another big piece is the cash on cash return. So cash on cash return is when you take into account all the money that you've put in so far. So you put your down payment, you had your funding costs, you had your closing costs. So it's all the money you had to put out initially to buy the property. That's your investment. So you want to see, well, how's my money working for me? If I have this much cash flow and I put this much money in, what kind of return is it? If I'm only going to make 2% return, well, maybe I shouldn't bother doing it. So that's cash on cash return is something that's going to be important for you to identify whether it's worth it for you to put your money into a deal. Okay. And this is assuming you have money you're putting into a deal. If you do not have money that you're putting into a deal, you still need to have money in the deal. So if it's not you, then it would be like a partner's money. The calculations are all the same. You still take the cash flow divided by the investment, the down payment plus the closing cost plus the funding costs, all right, to get a percentage cash on cash return. Now, DSCR stands for debt service coverage ratio. Okay, DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. Debt service coverage ratio is, it's really important from the lender standpoint, and this is what they're looking at. They want to make sure on a monthly basis that you have plenty of money coming in to cover their mortgage. Like that's like their biggest concern is, can you cover the mortgage? Sorry, FedEx truck is driving by, back and forth. Anyway, can you cover the mortgage? So let's say that a lender wants a 1.3 DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. What that means is they want to see that your net operating income is at least 1.3, excuse me, 1.3 times the mortgage amount or the debt service. Debt service and mortgage are used kind of synonymously as far as verbiage is concerned. All right. Excuse me, I have no idea why I'm coughing, just to be dramatic for you guys. All right, so DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. So we'll take a look at that when we look at the calculator, but that will give you an idea of whether there is enough operating income from the property compared to what the mortgage is going to be for this to make sense and be a safe investment. The higher your DSCR, the better. And it's usually like 1 point something. And Jennifer and I tend to run our debt service coverage ratios after we've actually refinanced, if it's a refinance, at least 1.55 to 1.6. And sometimes it's quite a bit higher than that. So that will sometimes impact our decision about how much cash to pull back out or how much cash to leave in the property. Okay. All right. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to pull up the calculator in just a minute or two. What I want you to do is I want you to jump into the chat and I want you to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how well you understand these different concepts. And if there's anything that you're like, oh, I really don't get that part, but you get some of the other ones, then just make a note of what that is. Okay, so go to the chat, open the chat, and on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you understand all of these components? And if there's anything that you're like, I just don't get it, then put that down as well. Good, good. That's my goal. My goal is for you guys to understand. All right, so scale of 1 to 10, how well do you understand these different concepts? Just helps me to know if there's something I need to delve into a little bit deeper. All right, so this is, and I'm going to do my best to explain the calculations, what they are, while showing this to you. This is just a tool to make things kind of go quicker. All right, so one of the first things that we were talking about Actually, I guess I want to make sure. Can you just in the chat, can you guys see where it would say copy of straight purchase calculations and offer page? Can you confirm you guys can see that? Good. Okay, good. I just want to make sure. Sometimes what I see on the screen, I think you guys can see, and then I find out later, oh, I was wrong. Okay, very cool. So in this simple mortgage calculator, I'm just going to kind of walk you through the different pieces and like what impacts what so that you can get an idea so that you can kind of build out the calculations for yourself. So let's say, for example, we have a purchase price of 130,000, or you're evaluating a purchase price of 130,000. So you're like, I'm considering, maybe they're asking 150 or 140, and you're like, let me see what it looks like at 130. Or maybe they're asking 130 and you're like, let me see if I can offer full price. Does it work for me? All right, then you're going to put in your down payment. I'm going to change this to 25% and hit enter. So the first thing that we're doing is we're calculating what is our down payment amount. All right, so you would take the purchase price times the down payment percentage, and that's going to be your down payment dollar amount. All right, so that'll be a dollar amount. And then your loan amount, which is going to be your next important piece, is the purchase price minus the down payment. Okay, so that's your loan amount. The loan amount is going to be important because your mortgage payments are going to be based on that when you take into account the amortization period and the interest rate. All right, now I'm not going to teach you guys how to calculate that because frankly, I'd have to do an entire lesson in Excel, and the resources are available on Google for you to just type in a mortgage calculator. So you can just literally Google mortgage calculator, type in a couple of numbers, and you'll get the mortgage payment. In this Excel document, I have it, I created it and it's built in, but it's not really a skill that you need to know given that the information is just available for free out there for you anyway. All right, but here's the next piece right here that I want to just, because what I want to do is I wanted to teach you the concepts, but then I also wanted to tie in where does it fit? Like at what point does it fit? How does it impact things? So what I have right here is lender/closing costs. I just used a straight 3%. Now, when you're in due diligence, you're gonna get more refined with it. So I'm gonna look at like, what are my actual lender costs? What are my actual closing costs? And I'm going to figure out what that is as a percentage, and then I can plug that into my calculator. Where this comes into play is how much cash I'm investing, which impacts my cash on cash return later on in the thing. All right, and then I have my amortization period. So in this particular case, let's say the amortization period is 30 years, and let's say that the interest rate is 5%. But if I change any of these things, for example, right here on the spreadsheet, you see the monthly payment is $523.40. That is a function of this $97,500 loan amount, this 30-year amortization period, and an annual interest rate of 5%. So if I changed anything, let's say I was like, I kind of want to put down more down payment. Said nobody ever, but whatever, let's just do it. So if I change the down payment from 25% to 30%, I want you to watch what happens to the monthly payment. Okay, so if I change it from 25 to 30, my payment went down to $488. All right, and for some of you, you're like, duh, but not everybody knows how everything flows. So I am going to take the time to explain it so that everybody can be at the same place. If I'm putting down more of a down payment, that means I'm paying more of the purchase price, which means I'm going to have a lower loan. If I have a lower loan, I'm going to have a lower payment. Okay, so logical steps on that. So that's one thing. Let me put it back to 25%. Another thing that's going to impact the monthly payment is the interest rate. So let's say I was paying 6.5% interest instead of 5%. That's going to knock my, well, it says 7, but it's really 6.5. Let me fix that. Okay, it's going to pop my payment up because now on a monthly basis, I'm paying more interest on that $97,000 loan. Okay, so that's another thing that will impact it. Another thing that will impact it is your amortization period. So if I'm looking at 30 years, kind of a most typical in residential, so 1 to 4 units, 30 years is what you're mostly going to see. But you do have the option sometimes of doing a shorter term loan. Let's say that you're at the point where you're like, I like having the cash flow, but my main objective is really about providing for myself at retirement, and I want to have the properties paid off, as soon as possible as a result. So even everything that we do always starts with the end in mind. It always starts with what is your end strategy, and then you back into everything. So let me show you, if you were making that decision, like, hey, I really want to pay it off sooner if I can, we would change that to, let's say it was going to be a 15-year loan. 15-year, fully amortized. That means at the end of the 15 years, the whole thing is paid off. All right, then, and it was at 5%, then my payment's going to be $771 a month. All right, so I'm going to pay $771 a month for 15 years in order to have the property free and clear at that point. But it definitely is going to have a negative impact on cash flow because my payment went up. All right, so let's change this back to 30. Now it's back to 523. So it was literally an extra $250 a month. Now, if your objective is maximizing cash flow now, you would never make that decision. If you were like, I mean, I don't really care about the extra $250 a month, but I'd love to have assets in retirement that have no mortgage on them and I get all the cash flow, then you might forego the $250 a month extra cash flow in order to get that goal. Does that make sense? You always have to begin with the end in mind. And that was something that when I was new as an investor, and this was back in 2003, so 17 years ago, nobody ever really laid it out for me like that. Like I always say, you got to start with a strategy. I mean, I say that now, but I was a spaz. I did it like every imaginable kind of investing, like like all over the country, every different exit strategy. And like, it was just crazy. Nobody ever sat down and said, you probably want to figure out like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And then you set up your investing strategy based on what that goal is. So obviously 17 years later, you have a lot of hindsight. So I just want you guys to be thinking about that is what are you trying to accomplish and by when? And then that's going to impact the decisions that you make when you're evaluating your purchase price, but also like what kind of loan you're going to get. That was a little bit off topic, but it's important enough that I want you to be thinking about it. All right, so some of the other inputs. So let's say that we were dealing with monthly rents of $1,500. Let's say the insurance was $950 a month. Let's say we have property management of 10%, which is fairly common in the 1 to 4 family range. And let's say we had vacancy of 5%. So vacancy isn't something we had mentioned previously, but it is something you want to think about because it's rare that you have units that are 100% occupied all the time. If nothing else, when someone moves out, it's not that common that you get to move someone in the very next day and that you have zero vacancy. Although we've had it happen, it doesn't happen that often. So even if you're in an area where keeping your units full is not a problem, it's a good idea to build in a little bit of vacancy factor just for the just in case. And if you're in a slower rental market, well, frankly, if you're in a slower rental market, you need to go back to the beginning and reevaluate your market research. All right, so if you have a high vacancy, you maybe don't want to be investing there because vacancy is for sure one of the most expensive expenses that we have. I hate when we have vacant units, like kills my whole projections for the year. All right, so we'll do a 5% vacancy, and if you want to be more conservative, you could do 10. Oh, oops, that was property taxes that were $1,500, not monthly rental income. Let's say the rental income was $1,500. Okay, and then let's say maintenance per unit per month. Let's say that's $50, right? And that's usually what we will have set aside for just in case. There's a lot of times where we don't have any maintenance on our units or on like any given unit. We have no maintenance, but then all of a sudden, 8 months in, we have a $200 repair for something. So if you're budgeting $50 per unit per month, at least you're putting money away and having it prepared, having it ready to go. Now, if you're buying something that has that's not in that great a shape, then you're probably going to need to have a higher maintenance reserve in there. So just be realistic about it. Don't be pie in the sky. If you're like, I mean, this property hasn't been renovated in a long time. It's really old. Maybe I should plan on $100 a month per unit just so that I'm kind of creating a bit of a savings account for when stuff does go wrong. Okay, and then I have a number of units. So what I'm saying here is, how did I do? Oh, yes. Okay. So what I'm saying here basically is that we have a duplex. That's the example. So let's say we have a duplex. Let's say the purchase price that we're evaluating is $130,000. And then these are our inputs, like our property taxes, rental income, different expenses. All right. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm looking at a projected operating statement. Okay. And so as far as knowing the calculations, this is super simple. It just starts with rental income. So your rental income, and then you put your vacancy allowance or whichever percentage you put in. So we did 5%. So in that case, that's $75. I'm right here in case anyone wasn't following where my eyes were. I forget sometimes that you guys can't see through my eyeballs. All right, so we have net rental income of $1,425 in this case. All right, so then we have our expenses. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking the annual, because some expenses are done in terms of annual and some are monthly. So you want to bring everything to the same place so that you're apples to apples, right? So you come down here, your property taxes, if it's $1,500 a year, that means it's $125 a month. You got your insurance at $79 a month based on whatever we put in, I think $950. Your property management is based on 10% of the rental income. And then we had maintenance of $100 a month that we were projecting based on $50 a month times 2. Okay, and if we had changed this to 100, just kind of show you. Let's say I changed that to $100 per month if I felt that was necessary. You'll see down here, it changes the maintenance to 200. Okay, just to show you how things flow through. Okay, so then what we have is total expenses. Now remember, debt service is not considered part of the monthly expenses for operation standpoint, all right, or the mortgage payment and debt service, same thing. All right, so the total expenses are $454, and so our net operating income is $971. Okay, so that means if you bought the property cash and you didn't have any mortgage, this would basically be your cash flow because that would be the end of it. There's no mortgage to pay. But if you want to figure out your cash flow, then we're over here. So to figure out your cash flow, you're taking your net operating income minus your mortgage payment of $523. And remember, mortgage payment is what we had calculated up here earlier when we talked about the loan amount of $97,000, amortization period of 30 years, and then the annual interest rate of 5%. All right. So then this is our projected monthly cash flow, $447, based on all of these different, scenarios. All right. So that's on a monthly basis. So then what we're doing is we're looking projected annual cash flow. So here's our annual net operating income, which is just monthly times 12, minus your annual mortgage payments of $6,281, which is this $523 times 12. Or you could just take probably $447 times 12 to figure out your annual cash flow. The reason you're doing this projected annual cash flow is because we need to have that number on an annual basis in order to calculate the cash on cash return. Because cash on cash return is always done on an annual basis. All right, so let's scoot down just a little bit. All right, so now we're down here, cash on cash return. So if I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, how much cash am I really making on this? Is this worth it for me to put my money in there? We take your down payment. And so remember up here, your down payment, in this case was 25% of the offer price. That's what we put in there. And so it was $32,000 and change. Okay, so we have our down payment plus the lender / closing costs. And remember that came when we said about 3%. If you don't know, if you're just going into a deal and you have no idea, 3% is a reasonable number to use as a plug until you find out, like in due diligence. I wouldn't bother to go into a lot of detail until you have it under contract, because a lot of times your offer is not accepted. So don't waste your time getting into the weeds and the details trying to find out before you make your offer, because while you're doing that, I'm just writing the offer and I'm getting it under contract. So you want, and I don't mean me specifically, but that is what we do. Like Jennifer and I, we act quickly, and every other investor I've ever trained over the past many years is trained to do the same thing. So you need to do the same thing. Don't do due diligence before you write your offer. Write your offer based on assumptions that are reasonable. Get your offer in. Only if they accept the offer are you then going to delve in. Okay. All right, so we have our down payment, and then 3% lender and closing costs was based on the loan amount. All right, so that was another $29.25. Right, this stuff is all stuff that you could do on a simple calculator and do by hand. And obviously, I'm a huge fan of, from a speed perspective, of creating tools and being able to plug a couple numbers and have it flow through. That being said, when you're new in investing and you're figuring this stuff out, it's really valuable, in my opinion, for you to go through and calculate the stuff by hand. And the reason I feel like that's very valuable, it's not fast, but it's very valuable to do that in the beginning before you go creating tools around it, is that it really forces you to understand like how things work. And it's not like, okay, yeah, they said do the calculation, plug a number, I get an answer. Like that's cool and it's fun and it's fast, but like you're going to get a lot more confidence over time if you actually do understand what's going on behind the scenes. It doesn't feel great when you're in a deal and you realize, I don't even exactly know what these calculations mean, and I plugged it in, I got an answer. So I want you to really embrace the math of it and go through and make sure that you really know how to calculate these pieces out. All right, it's just going to be great for your whole future. All right, so we have our total cash invested, the down payment, and then the lender and closing costs of $35,425. All right, so that's how much money I'm sending to the title company, and I'm comparing that to my annual projected cash flow at 5369, right? Remember that, and that was my annual net operating income minus my annual mortgage payments or debt service. So I'm making $5,300 compared to $35,000 put in. That means my cash on cash return is 15.2%. So how you calculate that by hand is you would take the annual cash flow of 5,369 divided by the total cash invested of 35,000 and change. Okay, and you will get 0.152 on your calculator, which is 15.2%. Okay, so that's where it ties in. Now, let's talk about DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. All right, so now we have our net operating income annual, right, that we already calculated, which was the 971 times 12. All right, and then we have our annual mortgage payments, which was our 523 times 12. All right, and so what you're doing to figure out your debt service coverage ratio, the question is, how much more is this than this? All right, so how you calculate that is you take your net operating income and you divide it by the annual mortgage payments. And in this case, it's 1.85. That would be considered a very, very, very good debt service coverage ratio. So like when you're evaluating this deal, like let's say the asking price was 150. All right, and you were like, well, let me just try some different numbers and see how things impact it. Let's just see what does the deal look like at 150. All right, so if I change my purchase price to 150,000, and let's say we leave all the other assumptions the same. Coming right down here. Okay, so now instead of being a 15% cash on cash return, it's only a 10%. Now that's still pretty good. 11% is not bad. My debt service coverage ratio is also still really good. So if it was a property and you're like, you know what, I like the property, I like the area, I want to own an asset in this area, really what you're just looking at is, am I okay with an 11% cash on cash return? Because I already know all day long you should have no problem getting funded if your debt service coverage ratio is 1.6. So that's pretty high. That's where we like ours to be, but it's considered, that's really great from the lender's perspective. All right, so you can just play with, as you figure out how to do this, you can play with different numbers and see how does it impact it. And the one thing that's being impacted here is really, that's impacting the cash flow, is just the mortgage amount. All right, so if the purchase price is higher, then you have a higher down payment. Well, actually that's not really driving it. The higher purchase price is driving the higher loan amount because your down payment percentage is the same, and the higher loan amount is driving the monthly payment to be higher. All right, so that's really what you're looking at. And so you can try different numbers and see, if you did 140,000, what would that look like? If we offered 140,000, we'd have about a 12.8% cash on cash and a 1.72% debt service coverage ratio. Okay, so there's no right or wrong. It just is simply information so that you can make an informed decision about what you're looking at going forward. And if you're doing, like if you're wholesaling, you want to know how to calculate these numbers, because when you're doing your investor packet to sell a deal to another investor, you need to be able to show them, like, what is it going to look like for them based on these different assumptions? Like, what is the cash on cash return going to look like for them based on this amount of down payment and this much loan amount, et cetera? What's their debt service coverage ratio going to look like? So even if you're not the buy and hold investor yet, but you're wholesaling and you're wholesaling to the buy and hold investor, it's really important that you learn these numbers so that you can present it to them and show them that, one, you've thought it through, two, you know what you're talking about, and three, they can see that, oh wow, this is a pretty good return on my money. All right, so anyway, those are the different pieces. All right, so let's jump back, stop sharing, jump back to the PowerPoint. And next, we're going to go into the BRRRR strategy. Okay, so these are all the pieces of the straight purchase. So the BRRRR components. The BRRRR one is, I wanted to teach a straight purchase first because a lot of the things are that really lay the foundation for the BRRRR. But the BRRRR has some additional things you have to take into account. So with the BRRRR strategy, where you're buying it, renovating it, renting it, refinance it, you're still going to have a down payment on the purchase and the rehab. So it depends on how much rehab it needs. So let's say, for example, let's say you were going to fund it with a hard money lender. And let's say the hard money lender would fund 80% of the purchase price and 100% of the rehab, which, by the way, is a fairly common, especially right now. It used to be more like 90-90 you could get. Right now, 8,100 is realistic. You get 80% of the purchase price and 100% of the rehab, even if you're new and haven't done a deal before. So that's something that's out there. So obviously you're buying the property for a lot less because it's a fixer, right? And so if you're doing 20% down on a fixer upper and you're getting all of the rehab funds, it's going to be less money that you're putting up initially, usually, as far as the down payment is concerned. All right. So another component is the funding costs. And just like before, you have points and you have fees. So points with hard money lenders can range anywhere from, I mean, they can range all over the place, but typically somewhere between 2 and 4 points, which is going to be between 2 and 4% of the loan amount. The loan amount is going to include the rehab part. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're borrowing 80% of the purchase, but 100% of the rehab, they don't give you the rehab funds up front. They hold them until you do work and then they reimburse you, but they do typically charge you for interest that whole time, and that is your loan amount. So when you're calculating how much the points are going to be, you have to take into account the entire amount of the loan, even though they're not giving it to you up front, right? Hard money lenders are pretty smart that way. All right, and then fees, same thing as before. Fees are anything from appraisal to legal fee, application fee, underwriting fee, processing fee, draw inspections, although those are typically separate, but we have one lender that we worked with that had, what do they call it? Basically it was draw fees you paid in advance. They called it fund control, right? So you just want to find out what the fees are so that you can build that in. You're going to have your initial closing costs, because when you're doing the BRRRR strategy, you have 2 closings. You close on it when you're buying it, and then you also go through another closing when you're refinancing it. Okay, so initial closing costs are part of this part of it. You're also going to have draw fees. Now, draw fees are when, like, let's say you've done your first $10,000 worth of work and you're telling the lender, okay, we're ready for a draw. They're going to send out an inspector or a realtor or somebody that they have to pay to come and take a look at the property. And they'll probably take some pictures and then send a report back to the hard money lender. So hard money lenders charge for that typically, and those are called draw fees. Right now, I'd say on average, what we are seeing in the market is they're typically around $200 a piece. As of a few years ago, most commonly it was $150, but they must have all got together and decided it was going to be $200. So that's typically what we see. So if you're planning on 4 draws during a rehab, then you would plan for an extra $1,000 so that you are accounting for everything. Now, inspection fees. Now, this is something that you may not hear other people talk about. This might be just something that you hear me talk about, but I will tell you emphatically, if you want to protect yourself when you're doing rehabs, and this has nothing to do with remote, whether you're doing it remote, you're doing it at the house next door. If you want to save yourself from paying for work that wasn't done or wasn't done correctly, you're going to have a third-party inspector. So what Jennifer and I do is we have the person who we hired originally to do the home inspection. We love it if we can have them do the draw inspections also. Now, this is not the hard money lenders draw person, because frankly, we don't know what their qualifications are. We don't know what their motivation is. We don't know what, they're not our person. Like, they're the hard money lenders person. So this is somebody that you pay separately. I think on average, we spend about $100 per draw inspection, but it's to have someone completely independent who has nothing to gain or lose, but is just there on our behalf to give us information. And I cannot tell you how many times our inspector has gone in and said, well, I mean, it's technically done, but none of the stuff's actually connected. It's almost like they set it up to make it look like it was done, but like the HVAC isn't actually installed, but it would look like it from pictures. Like, that's very valuable information. So what I'm going to say to the contractor is, I'm not paying you for the HVAC system that you're saying is done and installed, because it's not installed. But how would I know that? Only because I had my home inspector who's qualified go in and put eyes on the property. All right. And, we do everything remotely. So for us, we would have to have somebody go look at it anyway. But even if it was the house across the street, I mean, who am I to go and look at something and go, oh yeah, they did the cement board, blah, 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 right? I don't know. That's not my thing, right? I'm a real estate investor. I know how to pull everything together and make it happen, but I'm not a home inspector and I'm not a contractor. So what am I looking at exactly? So don't overvalue your eyes on a property, because chances are, unless you're a licensed contractor and you've been doing it for a long time, you don't even know what you're looking at, or you don't know at the level that your home inspector, who's paid to protect you, is looking at. Okay, so we budget in an extra, if it's 4 draws, we plan on 4 inspections also, so another $400. And I'm telling you what, it's the best investment you'll ever make, in both like your ability to sleep at night, and also to catch things before you pay for something that wasn't actually done or wasn't done correctly. All right, another component is the holding costs. So the holding costs are going to be the hard money lender interest payments if you funded it through hard money. Most hard money lenders, actually I didn't say most, I want to say all of them. There might be an exception here and there, but they charge interest only. So when you're doing your project, you're not paying an amortized payment. You're paying an interest only payment. All right, so interest only payments, property taxes. So if you're rehabbing over the course of 2 months, you got to take into account that there's going to be 2 months of property taxes that you're going to be paying while you're rehabbing. Builder's risk insurance, which is going to be the type of insurance product you're going to have when you're rehabbing. Now, understand when I'm talking about the BRRRR, I mean there's no tenants in there. You're not like rehabbing around them. The tenants are gone. There's nobody in the house. You are like legit doing a renovation. All right, and then utilities, because you're going to have utilities during the time that you're holding the property, which that's different from the straight buy and hold, because in those you have your tenant potentially paying those. But if it's being renovated, you're the one paying it. So you want to take those into account as well. All right. So the next components of the BRRRR that we're going to talk about is the refinance components. All right. So the first thing we need to think about is on the refinance side of it, what is the loan to value percentage? So what that means is when you buy a property, a fixer upper, and you fix it up, by the time you're done fixing it up, it should be worth substantially more than it was when you bought it, right? And ideally, it would be more than the purchase price in the rehab, right? You should get some kind of benefit for being the one to come in and turn that thing around. So loan to value is now that it's all renovated and it's fabulous and gorgeous and beautiful, people can't wait to move in. What is it worth now? Okay, and that we would call that after renovation value. But from the refinance standpoint, what you're finding out from lenders is what amount will they give you as a loan to value. So let's say that the new value of the property is $200,000 and you're getting a loan that has a loan to value of 70%, which is probably the most that you probably hope for right now. But we've had, when we've done our refinances, we've been offered as high as 75%. We don't typically go any higher than 70. We're okay leaving some money in the deal. We would rather it cash flow. So if the loan to value is 70% on a $200,000 value, that means my loan amount would be $140,000. Okay, and that's why, just like in the straight purchase, it was the down payment percentage that was driving the loan amount. In this case, it's the loan to value driving the loan amount because it's now going to be based on the after renovated value. All right, and then the other things that are going to impact is the interest rate and the amortization period. So same as it was on the straight purchase, the loan to value percentage is going to drive the loan amount. You have your interest rate, your amortization period, and those create the monthly mortgage payment. Okay, once it's performing. The other things to take into account is what are the refinance funding costs, right? You got the initial loan, but you're going to be getting a new loan when you refinance, and that costs money. So you want to take those things into account. And this is some of the stuff that I really didn't think about when I was new. And frankly, it might have been a couple of years before I ever really figured out what all happened, because I was operating on such a fast pace that I was just like closing, not exactly understanding how everything worked. But anyway, hindsight's 2020. So there's usually going to be points with your lender when you refinance, and probably some fees as well. So you want to take those into account because that's going to impact how much money you are leaving in the deal once you refinance. All right, and then the other component is the refinance closing costs, because you're going to have closing costs with the title company. Now, one of the things that you can do in order to lower some of those closing costs is when you're closing with the title company on the purchase, is ask them the question like, hey, I'm going to be refinancing this property. If I brought the closing back to you, would you be willing to offer some kind of discount? Because I'm, well, first of all, they had already done the title work on it, so it's more of a title update. And they almost always will, because they'd rather have the business and have you keep coming back there. So it's worth asking about. I mean, it's not usually a huge amount of money, but still, if it's an extra $400 or $500, it's an extra $400 or $500. Okay, so refinance closing costs is another piece of it. All right, and then the third, you see like the BRRRR has a lot more pieces to it. Post refinance, then we're looking at the same things that we're looking at on the straight purchase: rental income, mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, property management, maintenance, utilities, cash flow, cash out cash return, and DSCR. All right, so I want to show you guys Okay, so if you're dealing with, so the way I've done my calculations or my calculator is I just have everything like initially at one page so I can kind of see everything at once. So I'm going to walk through some of the assumptions. So let's say that the after rehab value was 150,000 and the asking price was 75,000 and the rehab was 25,000. Okay, those are just some assumptions. Let's say the annual property taxes were 1,600 and square footage. I don't remember why I had that in there, but maybe for reference. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is, in order to figure out what my costs are going to be during the rehab, I need to know what my rehab loan is going to look like, right? So what I have here is what's the percentage of the purchase? So 80% of purchase and 100% of rehab. So what that means is when I'm figuring out and I'm calculating what my loan amount is going to be with my hard money lender, I'm going to take 80% of this price. This is asking price, but it probably more realistic, probably should say purchase price. Oh no, it is actually asking price because I put purchase price somewhere else. But so let's say the asking price and the purchase price are the same. So it's taking 80% of the 75,000 and 100% of this 25,000 to calculate what the loan amount will be. And I'll show you where that comes out. All right. Then max percent of ARV. This is just a lot of hard money lenders will say we'll lend you up to 80% of purchase and 100% of rehab as long as it doesn't exceed 70% of the after rehab value. If you calculate things the way that we do, that would be very odd if you ever had that, but it's just something that you need to be aware of that they will say. You know, how many points do they charge? And remember, points are 1 point is 1% of the loan amount. What fees do they have and what is their interest rate? And 12% is a very common interest rate for hard money when you're doing a fixer upper. All right, and then what are some of the other closing and holding assumptions? I'm going to assume, for the purpose of showing you this, that we're going to be holding the property for 3 months during the rehab time. So, I mean, realistically, that's probably going to be a 2-month rehab plus, you know, if we need a month for, you know, marketing. All right, so 3 months. Hopefully it's faster than that. It's always our goal to have tenants in there within 8 weeks of us closing on the deal. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, but that's always our goal. And then we have purchase closing costs of 1.5% as an assumption in there. And then we have some insurance and utilities. Okay, so these are just all the different pieces as I show you some of the calculations so that you know, like, where did the information come from? Okay, and then actually, let me show you this and we'll go back to that. Okay, so on the initial purchase and the rehab, okay, so if I'm evaluating like, I'm thinking like, what is it going to look like if I offer 70,000? So I put in 70,000 here, and this was just telling me that it was a 93% strength of offer because on the first page I said the asking price was 75. All right, so the 75 actually wasn't driving anything. That was just to calculate this. Okay, so anyway, so let's say I'm like, well, what would it look like if I did $70,000? Actually, why don't we see what it looks like if we do 75 full offer price? Okay, so and then my rehab was 25,000, and so my total cost of the project is $100,000. Now, if you're funding it with cash or through your IRA, then you don't need to get a loan. But what I'm going to show you right now is assuming you got a loan. All right, so let's say, so here's our loan. So percentage of purchase, right, was 80%, right? If you remember from here, that was the assumption that we're using. So this is just pulling that in. So I would take 25 or 75,000 times 0.8, and that would give me 60,000. All right. And then of course we're funding 100% of the rehab, which is 25,000 here. So our total is 85,000. That would be our total loan amount. This max loan, remember on the first page when I said some lenders will have like a maximum of ARV. So they just want to make sure, if we said the ARV was 150,000, they want to make sure that the loan amount, this 85,000, is not higher than the 70%. Okay, so it doesn't really impact the rest of these numbers, but I do want to explain it to you so you at least know about it. All right, so our projected loan amount is $85,000. All right, so I'm looking at my down payment, right? So when I think of down payment, if I need $100,000 to purchase on the rehab, the property, but I'm getting a loan for $85,000, that means my down payment is effectively $15,000. The difference between the total purchase price and the loan amount, just like it was on the straight purchase. Okay, so I'm just kind of keeping track over here of what some of my closing funds are. Then we have our closing costs. So this is taking C9, which is the total amount of the project, times the closing costs that we had put in there on our assumptions, which was 1.5%. And again, for the purpose of calculating the offer, I'll use that, but I get it under contract, then I'll go back and figure out what are the actual closing costs, and I'll refine my numbers. Property taxes during rehab, since I made the assumption that we're going to be having it under rehab for 3 months, or before it goes into the new loan for 3 months, and it was $1,200 a year, or was it 16? Hold on, what did I say it was? Oh, $1,600 annual property tax. That means during the project, we're going to have about $400 of property taxes. So same things with insurance and utilities. It just takes the assumptions and it extrapolates it out. So I have what my numbers are. And you could do this exact same thing by hand. All right. So HML points for the rehab loan. So this is calculated by taking your total rehab loan, which in this case was $85,000, times 3%. Remember the points were 3% from the front page. And that tells me, okay, I'm going to need to be prepared with $2,550 for the points. All right, and then what are my hard money lender fees for the rehab loan? And that was, we had just put a straight $1,500 in there. And then what is the hard money lender interest during that time? So that's a little bit more of a complicated calculation, but basically what it is we're taking the $85,000 times 12% and applying that for 3 months. Okay, because that was the period of time that we said we're going to hold it for before we refinance it. Okay, so you would take 85,000 times 12%, and then you could divide that by 12 to get one month, and then multiply it by 3, and that'll be 2,550, which kind of makes sense because 3%. And then 3, anyway, I was like, oh, that's so interesting. It's the same one. Well, yeah, that makes sense because of the assumptions. All right, and then over here in closing funds, I always like to know going in, like, well, how much money are we going to need to put into this? So I know I have my $15,000 down payment. I have my closing cost of $1,500. Property taxes during rehab, I'm expecting it to be $400, $300 for insurance. I'm going to have to pay my points, my fees to the hard money lender, and probably like a half month of interest up front on the closing statement. So what I'm trying to figure out right here is, what am I expecting to see on the closing statement from the title company? How much cash are they asking me to come up with? All right, and then we have our mortgage and utilities during rehab. So the mortgage payment of the 12% of the 85,000, what are we gonna have to pay like each month? And so this kind of shows you how much money you need to be prepared for. You might call that gap funds, but it's based, how much money are you gonna need to have ready to go for the purpose of having enough money for the whole deal. So you get your down payment funds, your closing costs, your property taxes and insurance, hard money lender points, fees, and usually, you know, a ballpark half a month of interest payment. All right, plus you need your utilities, which I think we said $250 a month, plus your interest only payment to the hard money lender. Okay, so we're planning on having about $25,000 we're going to need for this project. So this is the first part of it. And this is why I say that the BRRRR strategy is more, it's definitely more complex to see all the pieces, but we're just going to break it down. It's understandable. It just takes some time. So now let's go back to, what is it going to look like when we refinance it? What are some of our inputs? What are some of our assumptions? All right. So on the refinance, here's our assumption. So if we want our desired loan to value to be 70%, and let's say that our refinance lender was going to charge us 2% or 2 points, and they were going to have $1,500 of fees, and let's say it was going to be 1% for refinance closing costs. All of these numbers can be changed. It's just, this is what my assumptions are that are going to drive the numbers on the next page. And then as far as my cash flow projections, let's say that I'm going to bring in $750 a month per unit. So let's say it's a duplex, and I have my insurance, property management, maintenance, and then let's say my debt service rate. Let's actually make it 5% and be consistent with the last one. Okay, so these are some of the assumptions that I'm putting in that are going to drive some of the numbers in the next page. All right, so let's go back to the calculator. All right, so this is what we're looking at over here. If I'm like, well, I'm just kind of curious, what is this going to look like when I go to refinance it? All right, so if the ARV is 150,000, and based on my desired loan to value, which was 70%, my projected loan amount would be 105,000. So on your calculator, if you take 150,000 times 0.7 or 70%, that will equal 105,000. So that's your new mortgage payment. That's going to be like your conventional lender. It could be through a hard money lender if they're offering rental loan, but it's basically through your end lender. Okay, so this is no longer hard money, like 12% hard money. It's now at 5%. What are your refinance points? So this was if we made the assumption that it was going to be 2 points, and that's based on 105,000 as our loan amount, then our points are 2,100. The fees were just a hard amount that we put in, and then our refinance closing costs, we said 1%. So we're taking 1% of the loan amount, okay, so that we are accounting for all of that. So we have our new loan of 105,000, right? That's the new loan based on 70% of the ARV. We have to pay off our initial loan to the hard money lender, right? That was $85,000, right? So now there's $20,000 left over, right? So well, we put down $15,000. So let's say, well, of course we want to get that $15,000 back if possible. So what I'm doing is I'm taking and I'm subtracting out all the amount of money, all the pieces that we had to put in to see how much could that $105,000 cover. All right, so I'm pulling out my down payment, I'm pulling out my closing, financing, and holding costs, and also my refinance costs. And I can see that if I take that $105,000 and I subtract my initial loan amount to pay off the hard money lender, I subtract my original $15,000 investment, plus the other funds I put into it, plus whatever refinance costs I had, it's negative 9,200. What that means is if I get a loan for 105,000, $10,000 or $9,200 of my funds are still going to be in the deal. Okay, and that's not an uncommon thing. It's, I mean, depending on how aggressive banks are being, we've seen opportunities to do, a cash out refi, but that's not that common. Okay, and you're usually going to leave some money in the property. So you want to evaluate, like, how much money am I leaving in, and is that worth it? All right. So then we have rental income over here of 18,000. So this was coming from that $750 per month per unit for the 2 units. All right, and then we have our expenses. We have total expenses, and we have our net operating income. So it's the same type of calculation we did on the straight purchase. Your debt service is taking the mortgage amount of the 105,000 at 30 years amortization at 5% interest, and over the course of the year, that's 6,700 of debt service. So that means your cash flow is $6,336. Okay, so all the same things that applied on the straight purchase now apply here. It's just that you're evaluating it based on what happens and what do things look like after it's been refinanced. All right, so we have a monthly cash flow of $528. That ends up being a DSCR, debt service coverage ratio, which is the net operating income divided by the debt service, of almost 2.0. Very, very high, right? So yeah, we're investing $9,200 in the property, but holy cow, like these numbers look really good, and the cash on cash return is 69%. So what that means is on an annual basis, my cash flow is $6,300. So every year after year, if nothing changed, I would get $6,300. What I had to put out in order to do that, or what I had to leave in the property, was $9,200. So every year I get $6,300 in. My initial investment of $9,200 just stays there, and so every year I have a cash on cash return of 69%. Okay, so those are kind of how everything flows through. Now, the way I set it up for myself is so I could kind of look at it and see, like, well, what would it look like if I changed it to 68,000 purchase price? I would look at this and go, oh, okay, well, where it really impacts it doesn't really change the monthly cash flow, because it didn't really change a lot of these numbers, because I'm still refinancing it based on 70% of the ARV. But what it did is it greatly lowered the amount of money I'm leaving in the property when I refinance. All right, so and then my cash on cash return got insane, went to 360%. So anyway, knowing how to put these different pieces together and how to do the calculations will give you more visibility into the future. Like, you want to, like, just calculate out, like, what is this really going to look like, so that you can make sure that you're paying the right price in the very beginning.
All right, all that being said, let's talk about taking action. If you're just here to watch and get more information, cool, you're good to go. But if you are done watching other people continue to buy property while you're just watching that happen, and you want to get started yourself, or you've started but you're ready to scale, we have set aside time to do a strategy session with you. In order to book a strategy session, what you need to do is text the word freedom to 373-8461. That's going to take you to a calendar page where you can book a call with one of our strategists and start taking the next steps to either getting your first investment property or taking next steps to start scaling your business. We look forward to seeing you on the other side.